Have you ever wondered what James Cameron has been hiding for us in Avatar 3? The title Fire and Ash already paints a picture that is darker, heavier, and maybe even more dangerous than anything we've seen before in Avatar or Avatar, The Way of Water. But what does that title really mean? What is Cameron planning to reveal about Pandora, its cultures, and its hidden history that we've only caught glimpses of so far? That's what I've been digging into, and I think I've cracked pieces of the puzzle that make this third installment not just another sequel, but a turning point that could change the way we view the entire saga. Welcome back to Hollywood Latest Updates. I'm Luke Harrison, and today I'm diving into what I believe is the layered story, the hidden symbolism, and the subtle setup leading us straight into Avatar Fire and Ash. This is not just about plot leaks or rumors, it's about analyzing what we've been given, reading between the lines, and piecing together the story James Cameron has carefully laid out since 2009. The first thing I want to highlight is how Cameron never picks a title casually. The Way of Water was not just a poetic phrase, it tied directly into the central theme of family, adaptability, and survival that water symbolized. Water was about connection, healing, and resilience. Now, with Fire and Ash, we're moving to something much more destructive, volatile, and transformative. Fire in mythology is almost always a double-edged sword. It can warm, but it can also burn. Ash implies loss, aftermath, and rebirth. This is the cycle Cameron seems to be building. Water gave life, fire may destroy, and ash leaves behind the soil for something new to rise. If you think about that progression, Avatar 3 might be the true midpoint of the saga, where the stakes escalate beyond a battle for survival into a larger ideological clash that threatens Pandora's entire balance. If we rewind back to the first Avatar, Cameron made it clear that Pandora itself was a living character. Eywa wasn't just a background idea, she was a guiding force. The Na'vi's spiritual connection was meant to show us not just their relationship with nature, but how nature itself had its own consciousness. In The Way of Water, that concept expanded through the Metkayina and their connection to the sea, particularly the tokens. But here's where I think the setup is hiding something important. If water represented connection, what happens when fire enters the equation? Fire is often associated with industrialization, warfare, and destruction. And if the Na'vi clans connected to fire are revealed in the third film, as Cameron has already hinted with the so-called Ash people, then the big question is, are they allies? Or are they an embodiment of a darker side of Pandora's spirit? Something I've been thinking about is how Cameron might twist our expectations. In the first two films, the Na'vi have been portrayed as noble, spiritual, and more in tune with the planet than the humans. But if the third film introduces a fire clan that doesn't live in harmony with nature, or maybe uses fire in destructive ways, that would create a fascinating moral tension. What if not all Na'vi are the same? What if some of them, instead of resisting humanity's exploitation, actually mirror it? That's the kind of gray morality Cameron loves to explore, because he knows a story only stays interesting when the audience realizes there's no easy good versus evil divide. Fire could become the symbol of that, both a natural element of Pandora and a tool that could lead to devastation if abused. Now, one detail that stuck out to me when rewatching The Way of Water was how much focus Cameron placed on the aftermath of violence. Every death mattered. Every loss left a scar, not just on the characters, but on the environment itself. The whale hunts weren't just brutal for spectacle. They were a foreshadowing of what humanity was willing to do, and how Pandora could bleed. If Fire and Ash follows that thread, then the movie might not just be about Jake Sully's family running anymore. It might be about the Na'vi facing their own divisions, their own capacity for destruction, and ultimately being forced to reckon with what happens when fire consumes everything. Ash isn't just a poetic flourish, it's the literal reminder that once something burns, it doesn't return the same way. That could mean villages destroyed, forests gone, or even deeper, relationships and alliances shattered beyond repair. Another layer here that I don't think gets enough attention is Kiri, Jake, and Neytiri's adopted daughter. Her mysterious connection to Eywa is not just a subplot, it feels like the spine of the larger saga. In The Way of Water, she experiences vision, seizures, and direct communion with Eywa in ways no one else can. This isn't just about her being special, it feels like Cameron is planting seeds for a much bigger revelation. possibly about Pandora itself. And here's my theory: if Kiri is essentially a bridge to Awa, then the conflict in Fire and Ash may put her in direct opposition not just to humanity, but maybe even to other Na'vi who have lost their way. That could create tension within Jake's own family, especially as Loak begins to take on a leadership role, and as Neytiri continues to struggle with her grief and anger. Fire may not only symbolize war, it may represent the inner turmoil within this family and their allies. What really makes me lean into this idea is how James Cameron structures his stories. He always works with cycles: nature, technology, humanity repeating mistakes. Think about Terminator and how it's all about machines rising because humans keep making the same errors. Think about Titanic, where human arrogance led to tragedy. In Avatar, the cycle is ecological and spiritual. Humans destroyed Earth, they came to Pandora, and they're repeating the same mistakes. But what if the Na'vi themselves are shown repeating mistakes too? The Ash people could be a reflection of that cycle, proving that even the Na'vi are not immune to corruption or imbalance. It would fit perfectly into Cameron's obsession with how no society is safe from downfall if it forgets its connection to nature. Here's where I think the real storytelling twist could lie. What if the Fire Clan isn't purely an antagonist? What if they're introduced as misunderstood, rough, maybe even hostile at first? But they hold a piece of truth the other clans don't. Ash isn't only destruction, it's also what nourishes new life. Volcanoes, for example, leave behind rich soil. Could it be that the Ash people, while appearing destructive, actually hold knowledge about Awa or Pandora that Jake's family needs in order to face the greater threat? The humans and their relentless colonization. This could be Cameron's way of showing us that balance doesn't come from just water or just fire, but from the integration of both. And if Kiri is the bridge between Awa and the Na'vi, she might be the one to realize that truth before anyone else does. When I think about the role humanity is set to play in Avatar: Fire and Ash, I can't help but notice how Cameron has been steadily escalating their presence and their methods. In the first movie, it was all about corporate greed and military muscle. RDA wanted unobtainium, and they didn't care what stood in the way. In the second, we saw an evolution. It wasn't just about resources anymore, but survival itself. Earth is dying, and Pandora is the fallback plan. The whale hunting subplot with the tokens highlighted how far humans were willing to go for profit. But behind that was something even scarier: the determination to colonize and settle Pandora no matter the cost. And this is where fire as a metaphor burns brightest. Colonization has always been about burning the old world to make room for the new. And in this case, humans could very well set Pandora literally ablaze in their pursuit of domination. We already saw them scorch forests in Avatar. What if this time, the fire spreads beyond Jake's ability to contain it? That would force the Na'vi to confront not just the humans, but their own vulnerabilities in ways we haven't seen before. But I don't think Cameron is going to make humanity the only fire wielders here. If the Ash people are as important as I suspect, their introduction could complicate Jake's war. Imagine Jake trying to unite clans against humanity, only to discover that some Na'vi aren't interested in unity at all. Some may even collaborate with the humans if it means gaining power or resources. And why wouldn't they? Fire is seductive. It offers strength, intimidation, and control. For a Na'vi clan that has maybe lived in volcanic regions, constantly surviving eruptions and heat, fire could be a symbol of pride. Instead of water's calm, they thrive on volatility. That would make them fierce, possibly reckless, but not necessarily evil. And that complexity is exactly the kind of storytelling Cameron thrives on. He doesn't want us to see a cardboard villain clan. He wants us to wrestle with the uncomfortable truth that survival sometimes leads to moral compromises. This leads me to Jake's family dynamic. In The Way of Water, we saw Jake as a father trying desperately to protect his kids, sometimes to the point of smothering them. Loak felt ignored, Nediam carried too much responsibility, and Kiri was dealing with mysteries Jake couldn't understand. That dynamic is not going away. In fact, fire as a theme could inflame those tensions even more. Loak, already impulsive and drawn to risk, might find himself pulled toward the fierceness of the Ash people. Maybe he sees in them a kind of rebellious strength that he's been craving his whole life. Neytiri, on the other hand, could see them as dangerous echoes of the humans, too destructive, too disrespectful of Awa, and Jake, stuck in the middle, would once again have to balance being a leader and a father, knowing that one wrong move could fracture both his family and his people. That, to me, feels like the emotional core Cameron will bring into the third film. Because while spectacle matters, Cameron always anchors it in family conflict. And then there's Kiri. If fire is destructive, Kiri might be the counterbalance, the life that emerges after destruction. I keep circling back to her connection with Awa, and how Cameron left her storyline deliberately unresolved in The Way of Water. Her seizure-like visions at the spirit tree weren't random, they were warnings. Kyrie is special not because she's Jake's daughter, but because she represents something new in Pandora's ecosystem. A direct child of Awa, maybe even a living extension of her. If that's the case, then Fire and Ash might be where we see Kiri take on a role almost like a prophet. Someone who can sense where Pandora is headed before anyone else. But here's the twist. Prophets in stories are rarely believed right away. If Kiri warns about fire destroying everything, she might be dismissed, doubted, or even alienated. That sets up not just external conflict with humans and the Ash people, but internal conflict within Jake's family and their allies. Another point I can't ignore is how Cameron has always loved mirroring human history in his films. The colonization of Pandora mirrors colonialism on Earth. The token hunts mirrored whaling, and the battles mirror real-world wars fought over land and resources. If Fire and Ash follows that pattern, then this could be the Burning Times, the scorched earth strategy humans have used throughout history when conquering territories. Think of how armies would burn crops to starve out their enemies or destroy entire villages to break resistance. It's brutal, but effective. And if the RDA brings that level of destruction to Pandora, the stakes rise beyond battles over a few regions. It becomes an existential war for the entire moon. The Na'vi can't just hide in the water or the forests anymore. They'll have to confront the flames directly. That sets the stage for a massive escalation, one that could redefine the entire saga's direction. Now, let's talk about Neytiri. She's always been the soul of the Na'vi perspective in these films. In the first movie, she was Jake's guide into understanding Awa. In the second, she was the grieving mother, the warrior torn apart by loss. But in the third, I think she's gonna burn, not literally but emotionally. Her rage, her grief, and her protective instincts could push her toward decisions that Jake may not agree with. Imagine Neytiri seeing fire spread across her world and interpreting it not as a symbol of balance, but as blasphemy, as pure destruction. That would make her clash with the Ash people even harder, and possibly even with her own children if they don't share her viewpoint. Neytiri's arc, in my view, is heading toward a moment where she has to either let her anger consume her or find a way to channel it into something constructive. That's the essence of fire. When it's uncontrolled, it destroys. When it's harnessed, it forges. And Neytiri may be the character who has to embody that lesson. Finally, I want to touch on the idea of ash itself. Ash is what remains when fire has burned everything away. It's a haunting image, but it's also deeply symbolic of rebirth. Entire ecosystems on Earth thrive in volcanic ash, which enriches the soil. Could Cameron be using this to foreshadow that out of the destruction in Avatar 3, something greater will be born? Maybe unity among clans that were once divided. Maybe a new role for Jake's children as leaders of a new era. Or maybe even a transformation of Pandora itself, where Awa evolves in response to the devastation. I don't think Cameron will give us a simple fire bad, water good story. I think he's going to show us how destruction is sometimes necessary for growth. And that's where the title Fire and Ash finds its true meaning, not just in the literal flames, but in the ashes that remain and the possibility of something stronger rising from them. One thing I keep circling back to is how Cameron uses contrast between environments to drive his story forward. The first film thrived in the lush forests of the Omaticaya. The second submerged us in the vibrant oceans of the Metkayina, and the third seems destined to immerse us in the volcanic, fiery landscapes of the Ash people. Each environment doesn't just act as a backdrop, it shapes the culture of the clan that lives within it. So if the Ash people thrive among lava flows, smoldering rock, and landscapes that constantly test survival, then their worldview has to be fundamentally different. They wouldn't see fire as destruction. They'd see it as strength, resilience, a purifier. That changes the tone of how Jake and his family might interact with them. For Jake, who spent years adapting to Pandora through nature's gentler aspects, meeting a clan that embraces fire's violence could feel like a clash of philosophies. And that tension, I believe, will form one of the central conflicts of the film. Not just man versus nature or Na'vi versus human, but Na'vi versus Na'vi over what balance with Eywa truly means. Now imagine Lo'ak stepping into this world. In the second film, he was the outcast, always trying to prove himself, constantly misunderstood by his father. Yet by the end, we saw his courage and empathy shine through, especially in his bond with Payakan, the outcast token. That parallel is too important to ignore. Cameron loves to mirror arcs across species and characters, so if Lo'ak connected to an outcast in the ocean, it's only natural he might gravitate toward an outcast people on land. Maybe the Ash people have been dismissed by other clans as too destructive or too hostile, and Lo'ak sees something in them no one else does. That could be his growth, finding his own path, even if it means stepping away from Jake's shadow. And if the Ash people carry knowledge that could change the course of the war, then Lo'ak's bond with him might become the turning point in uniting or dividing the Na'vi against humanity's invasion. But Kiri's role in all this is what excites me the most. If Lo'ak is drawn to fire, then Kiri represents what rises from Ash. Her connection to Eywa might allow her to sense things even the Ash people don't fully understand. Maybe that their fiery lands are hiding something deeper, like a hidden node of Eywa or a spiritual significance no one has tapped into yet. That would make Kiri a kind of spiritual leader, even if she doesn't want the role. Think of the weight that puts on her. A teenager, already struggling with identity, now caught between family, destiny, and the literal soul of Pandora. And if humanity threatens to sever her connection to Eywa, say by targeting the spiritual sites in volcanic regions, that conflict becomes intensely personal. It's not just about saving a tree or a reef anymore, it's about saving her own life force, her own sense of belonging. Cameron loves to put characters under that kind of personal and existential pressure, and Kiri is being positioned as the ultimate linchpin for the saga's larger mythos. Of course, this raises a darker possibility. What if the fire element doesn't just test the Na'vi, but also Eywa herself? We've always seen Eywa as this benevolent, guiding presence, but what if Fire and Ash shows us that even Eywa can be pushed to extremes? Fire spreads uncontrollably, and if Pandora's consciousness reflects its elements, then maybe Eywa could become wrathful, destructive, unleashing fire in defense of herself. That would blur the line between natural disaster and divine punishment. Imagine the horror of Jake's family realizing that Pandora herself is burning to fight back against human exploitation, and the Na'vi are caught in the flames. That would flip the story's perspective. No longer just man destroying nature, but nature lashing out, forcing everyone, even the Na'vi, to confront whether Eywa's survival means their destruction too. It's a terrifying but fascinating direction Cameron could take, and it would raise the stakes to a whole new level. And where does Neytiri fit into this? I think her story is heading toward the most tragic and transformative arc of all. In The Way of Water, we saw her grief consume her after Neteyam's death. She was fierce, brutal, almost feral in the final battle. That rage doesn't just disappear in the next movie, it evolves. If she encounters the Ash people, I suspect she'll project her anger onto them, seeing their fire as symbolic of everything she hates. Destruction, violence, the kind of loss she's endured. Neytiri could become the most uncompromising voice against them, setting her at odds not only with Jake but potentially with her children, especially Lo'ak. That kind of family fracture would make for powerful storytelling, because it's not just external forces tearing them apart. It's fire seeping into their relationships, burning away trust until only ash remains. Neytiri has always been the heart of the Na'vi spirit, but what happens if her heart hardens into vengeance? That's the emotional gamble Cameron may take in this film. And then there's Quaritch. We can't forget that his story didn't end in The Way of Water. His survival as a recombinant sets him up for a major role in the third film, and I can't shake the idea that Cameron will make him more complex than just a villain with a grudge. Fire and Ash could just as easily apply to Quaritch's personal journey. He's been burned, literally reborn through technology, and now he exists in the ashes of his former self. What does that mean for his character? Does he double down on his vendetta against Jake and the Na'vi? Or does he start questioning his identity as a cloned memory in a Na'vi body? That identity crisis could mirror the larger theme of fire, destruction of the old self, forging of something new. And if Quaritch, of all people, begins to wrestle with who he is, it could lead to surprising alliances or betrayals that none of the characters see coming. Imagine the irony of Quaritch, once a destroyer, realizing that he understands the fire within better than anyone else. The deeper I dig into all these threads, the clearer it becomes that Avatar, Fire and Ash, is not going to be a simple continuation of the story we've seen. It's going to be a transformation of characters, of Pandora, of the entire saga. Fire doesn't just consume, it reshapes. Ash doesn't just signify death, it marks the soil for rebirth. Cameron has been building toward this elemental escalation from the start, and Act 3 of the saga is where everything ignites. Humanity will push harder, the Na'vi will fracture, Jake's family will face their deepest conflicts, and Kiri will emerge as something far more significant than we can fully grasp yet. The fire is coming, and when it dies down, the ashes will decide who survives and what Pandora becomes next. As I think about where Avatar, Fire and Ash could take the conflict, one detail stands out. Every Cameron story reaches a boiling point where the stakes become not just personal, but planetary. In the first Avatar, it was the destruction of Home Tree. In the second, it was the Tulkun slaughter and the threat of wiping out the Metkayina. For the third, I think the escalation will be fire unleashed on a scale we haven't seen before. Volcanic eruptions, burning forests, scorched villages. This won't just be spectacle, it will be thematic. Fire spreads fast, and unlike water, it's difficult to contain. It destroys indiscriminately, making no distinction between soldier, civilian, or sacred ground. If Cameron unleashes that, it will force the Na'vi to face the one thing they've avoided so far. The possibility that they cannot protect every piece of Pandora, no matter how deeply they pray to Eywa. That helplessness is going to shape the character's choices in devastating ways. I can see Jake grappling with that more than anyone. His whole philosophy since becoming a Na'vi has been about defending his family and resisting humanity's greed. But what happens when the fire is too big to fight? When whole swaths of Pandora fall despite everything he does? Jake has always been portrayed as a warrior who believes strategy and unity can overcome anything, but fire laughs at strategy. It's chaos incarnate. This may be the movie where Jake finally realizes that being a leader isn't just about fighting battles, it's about accepting loss and finding strength in what remains. That would mark a huge step in his arc, turning him from a reactive fighter into a leader who can inspire others to survive the ashes. And if Cameron wants to hand the torch to the younger generation, Loak and Kiri, then breaking Jake down to this point could be the way to set that up. Loak's development, however, is where the emotional heart could shift. By the end of The Way of Water, Loak was positioned as the heir to Jake's mantle, but that doesn't mean his journey will be smooth. If he bonds with the Ash people, I suspect he'll find both empowerment and danger in their ways. They could validate his recklessness, his need to prove himself, and at the same time tempt him into seeing fire as the only answer to human aggression. That creates a powerful internal conflict. Does Loak embrace the fire and risk becoming destructive, or does he find a way to channel it into something greater? Cameron loves giving his younger characters dilemmas that mirror their parents' mistakes. Loak might be Jake's reflection in this film, forced to learn through fire the hard lessons Jake once learned through the forest. And if that arc is handled right, Loak could step out not just as Jake's son, but as his own kind of leader born of flame tested by ash. Kiri's side of the story feels even more mythic. If fire represents destruction, Kiri might embody the rebirth that follows. But rebirth is never painless. She's still a child of mystery, with her origins tied to Grace Augustine and Eywa herself. And in The Way of Water, we saw how fragile her existence already is. Those seizures weren't just random. They were warnings that her bond with Eywa is both powerful and dangerous. In Fire and Ash, I think Kiri will be forced to confront that head on. Imagine her being drawn to volcanic regions, sensing Eywa's presence there more vividly than ever, only to realize that the fire threatens to consume her if she pushes too far. That tension between her being a savior and her being vulnerable will likely define her arc. And in classic Cameron style, it might be Kiri's choices in the heat of crisis that decide whether Pandora is consumed by flames or reborn from ashes. Meanwhile, Neytiri's story is heading toward one of the most combustible arcs in the entire saga. If she couldn't contain her fury in the second film, what happens when she sees fire tearing across Pandora in the third? I think she'll be pushed to her limits, possibly even becoming more dangerous than Jake realizes. Her grief for Netayam is not something she can simply bury, and fire could become the perfect metaphor for her inner state, raging, uncontrollable, destructive. If Neytiri begins seeing the Ash people as symbols of all that loss, she might reject them outright, setting up a rift not just with Loak but possibly with Jake himself. That kind of family fracture could be devastating, but also dramatically necessary. Neytiri has always been the emotional anchor of the story. If she burns, then everyone else around her has to face the fallout. And that could mean Jake is forced to step in between his wife and his children in ways we haven't seen before. But let's not forget Quaritch. He's still out there, and his role in this fire-driven chapter could be pivotal. In many ways, he's already a creature of fire, reborn through the burning technology of recombination, fueled by rage and scarred by his repeated defeats. Yet, what fascinates me is how Cameron might evolve him. Quaritch isn't just a villain anymore. He's a man forced to grapple with his own existence. What does it mean to be a memory copy living in a Na'vi body? Does he feel the pull of Eywa, or is he entirely severed from it? In Fire and Ash, I wouldn't be surprised if Quaritch embodies the destructive fire that can be tamed, burning through everything in his path, even allies, in his obsession with Jake. But there's also a chance Cameron plays with irony. Quaritch, realizing his own fractured identity, might begin to question the very war he's fighting. That ambiguity could make him one of the saga's most surprising figures, especially if his choices influence how the fire spreads across Pandora. Finally, I want to return to the concept of Ash. Up to this point, Ash has been a haunting image, what remains after devastation. But Ash is also fertile, rich, the foundation of new growth. I think Cameron is planting the seeds of a larger theme, that destruction and creation are inseparable. Out of fire comes ash, and out of ash comes renewal. For Pandora, that might mean that even as the humans and Na'vi clash, something larger is being born. A unity of clans that has never existed before. Or an awakening of Eywa on a level no one expected. For Jake's family, it might mean that out of loss, out of pain, comes a new purpose that redefines who they are and what they fight for. If that's the case, then Fire and Ash isn't just about destruction, it's about transformation. And that transformation is what will carry us into the next chapters of Cameron's saga, reshaping not only Pandora, but the very soul of its people. What really fascinates me about the possibilities for Avatar, Fire and Ash, is how James Cameron always layers his stories to set up not just a conclusion, but a continuation. This isn't meant to be the final chapter. It's the midpoint of a 5-film saga. That means the ending of Fire and Ash won't be a clean resolution, but rather a tectonic shift that propels everything forward. If we think about the structure, this is the Empire Strikes Back of the Avatar series. The chapter where everything fractures, where hope seems to dwindle, and where characters are tested in ways that redefine them. Fire is the perfect metaphor for this point in the saga, because it tears down everything that existed before. So when I picture how Fire and Ash ends, I don't see victory. I see loss, division, and the ashes of what the Na'vi thought they understood about themselves and their world. And out of that, the stage is set for the renewal and unification that Cameron will likely explore in films 4 and 5. One area where this shift could become crystal clear is the fate of Jake's family. They've already suffered with Netayam's death, but Cameron doesn't stop at one tragedy. He builds cycles of loss and growth. Loak may find his place with the Ash people, but that comes with risk. If he steps too close to fire, he could burn. Not necessarily literally, but emotionally. Perhaps by betraying his father's trust or clashing with Neytiri. Kiri may finally embrace her role as a conduit of Eywa, but the weight of that responsibility could isolate her from her siblings. Even Toog, the youngest, might have to grow up faster than expected, seeing fire sweep away the innocence she still clings to. Jake and Neytiri themselves could be pulled apart. Jake leaning toward diplomacy and survival, Neytiri driven by grief and vengeance. The family, once the saga's anchor, may scatter like embers in the wind. And while that sounds tragic, it's exactly the kind of emotional fracture that makes for compelling storytelling. On a larger scale, the Na'vi as a people may face their deepest existential crisis. The Ash people could emerge not as villains, but as a mirror held up to the Omaticaya and Metkayina. They might expose the Na'vi's hypocrisy, accusing them of seeing themselves as guardians of Eywa while turning a blind eye to the suffering of other clans. Or perhaps the Ash people reveal knowledge the others fear, like the possibility that Eywa herself requires destruction to survive. That would shatter the Na'vi's spiritual certainty, leaving them divided about what Eywa truly represents. And meanwhile, humanity would exploit that division, fanning the flames, literally and figuratively, to tighten their grip on Pandora. The result is a world where Na'vi unity collapses, humans grow stronger, and fire consumes everything in its path. That's not a conclusion. That's a setup for a war unlike anything we've seen before. Quaritch's journey too feels like it has to climax in fire. He's already a ghost of himself, a man living in a cloned Na'vi body, torn between his old hatred and his new existence. In Fire and Ash, I think Cameron will push him to the brink. Does Quaritch fully embrace his destructive nature, becoming a kind of firestorm that consumes everything Jake loves? Or does he confront his fractured identity, perhaps realizing he can't keep living in the ashes of who he once was? Either path could lead to a shocking turn. If he doubles down, he becomes the saga's embodiment of fire without rebirth, pure annihilation. If he questions himself, he might become a reluctant ally or a wildcard who changes the trajectory of the war. And knowing Cameron, it could be both. Quaritch raging as a villain until he burns out, only for the ashes of his story to lay the groundwork for something unexpected. Either way, his arc will be inseparable from the themes of Fire and Ash, destruction and rebirth. I also think about how the environment itself will play into the climax. We've seen the forests, the oceans, the skies, but volcanic landscapes are something else entirely. They don't just symbolize destruction, they embody transformation. Lava destroys everything in its path, but when it cools, it creates new land. Fire reduces forest to ash, but that ash enriches the soil for new growth. If Cameron leans into this imagery, then the climax of Fire and Ash might not just be a battle, it could be Pandora itself reshaping in real time. Imagine Jake, Neytiri, Loak, and Kiri caught in the middle of a volcanic eruption, forced to choose between saving their family and saving the spiritual heart of the planet. That would be classic Cameron, pitting intimate family stakes against a apocalyptic environmental spectacle, making every decision feel both personal and cosmic. And at the heart of all this is the cycle Cameron has been building from the beginning. Water connects, fire destroys, ash rebuilds. The first two films gave us hope and resilience, but the third will take us through the valley of loss. That's the only way the saga can reach its ultimate message. That renewal is possible, but only after destruction has done its work. It's painful, but it's also necessary. For the characters, for Pandora, for the audience, Fire and Ash is the chapter where we learn that survival isn't about avoiding fire. It's about enduring it, learning from it, and finding the strength to rise from the ashes. That's why this film matters. It's the crucible that will forge the future of the Avatar saga. And that brings me to the close of this breakdown. If you followed me through this deep dive, you know that what I see in Avatar, Fire and Ash isn't just another blockbuster sequel. I see a story about destruction, transformation, and the painful but necessary path toward renewal. We'll see Jake tested, Neytiri consumed by rage, Loak tempted by fire, Kiri stepping into her destiny, Quaritch burning through his identity crisis, and Pandora itself reshaping under the weight of flames. It won't be clean, it won't be easy, and it won't be comforting, but that's exactly why I believe Cameron chose this title. Because in Fire, there's both danger and creation. In Ash, there's both death and life. And that is the heart of Avatar 3. So that's my full breakdown of what I think James Cameron is setting up with Avatar, Fire and Ash. If you enjoyed this deep dive and want to hear more theories and story explorations like this, don't forget to like this video, share it with other Avatar fans, and subscribe to Hollywood latest updates for more. And if you'd like to directly support the work that goes into making these breakdowns, please consider using the Super Thanks option. Any bit of support helps, and even a $20 contribution goes a long way. I'm Luke Harrison, and I'll be back with more updates, theories, and breakdowns on everything Hollywood has to offer. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.